Hello from Manila, Philippines. This is Bart Adesh from the Asian Development Bank Knowledge Sharing and Services Center. Welcome to the first Knowledge Sharing Webinar Series program of 2017. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and I do hope that you'll be able to stay for the entire duration of this 90-minute program. This webinar is a pre-event activity leading up to the Asia Leadership Program, or ALP, event that's being held in Tokyo, Japan in June. We are expecting about 24 participants to join in Tokyo, hailing from countries as diverse as Armenia, the People's Republic of China, Georgia, Mongolia, Myanmar, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Timor-Leste. Some of you are joining us in today's webinar. We have also invited alumni from past editions of the ALP and Asian Development Bank partners to participate with us here today. Before we start, let me just say a word or two about the ALP. The program aims to create a critical mass of change agents among policymakers and development practitioners in ADB's developing member countries. In particular, the ALP aims to enhance the knowledge and leadership capabilities of participants, again coming from ADB's developing member countries across Asia and the Pacific. The ALP also promotes knowledge sharing and learning through online activities like this one and face-to-face discussions such as the ALP program in Tokyo in June. And finally, the ALP works to operationalize lessons and best practice in policies and programs. I'd like to now introduce the speaker for today's session, which will focus on strategic leadership in public organizations. He will tell you about the webinar series, mention the house rules for participation today, highlight further opportunities for you to engage and learn with the ALP, and deliver today's presentation. Dr. Young-Uk Kang is my colleague here in ADB's Knowledge Sharing and Services Center. Before joining ADB, he was a professor at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management in Seoul in the Republic of Korea. He held that role for 9 years. His areas of experience include governance, strategic leadership, public finance, economic analysis, policy analysis, urban development, and conflict negotiation and resolution. Young earned his PhD in public administration from the New York University. He also holds a master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago and an MBA from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I now turn the microphone over to Young to provide more background details and to lead you into the presentation. I wish you an excellent webinar.
Let me introduce what we do through the Knowledge Sharing Webinar Series. The Knowledge Sharing Webinar Series is one of the 4 learning activities of the Asia Leadership Program. And the other 3 are the face-to-face annual program, e-learning, and also the venue that we provide for online communications through the venue that we call Community of Leaders. The Knowledge Sharing Webinar Series was conceived to promote real-time, borderless knowledge sharing and learning among policymakers and leaders across the Asia-Pacific region. Also enhancing dialogues, including peer-to-peer and the country-to-country learning. Before I begin my presentation, there are a couple of housekeeping rules. Please mute your phones, and if you have any questions during the time of the presentation, please type in instead of speaking into the microphone. And you can email us later that if you have any technical difficulties, please email us so we can address them from our side. We have shared a number of resources with you as a pre-event reading materials. We weren't able to share the actual documents, but then we were hoping that you can access them through any resources that you may have. And these are quite well-established articles. You may consider them as a bit old, but then it's still relevant today. And there will be post-event opportunities for your feedback and discussion and your review. Now, let's start with my presentation. Now, let's first think about why we need to talk about strategic approach when we talk about managing your public organization. In the old days, in United States, Woodrow Wilson came up with an idea of having a politically neutral bureaucrats. At the time, the problem they had is that with the changes, the political power, that all the bureaucrats were looking to the changes of political power, and they follow the rules follow the directives from the top without paying much attention on keeping the public value, what's good for the general public. So Woodrow Wilson suggested the idea that by making the public servants politically neutral and doing so by guaranteeing their tenure to public servant, so that once they get hired, they retire unless they commit serious crime, that would protect the public servant from influences of the politics. But then it also created, over time, additional issues and concerns because of the inaction, the red tapes, so-called bureaucrats that we call them today, that are still also following the directives from the top without much of a questioning whether the direction is right or wrong for the public. So new group of people came up with the idea of training public servants to lead from below. It's a highly debated issue because it's almost asking bureaucrats to take a lead in a democratic society, that many of them see it as a very dangerous move because the bureaucrats would have a lifetime tenure in the organization and they could be directing the whole nation as they see fit and even to their own advantages. But still, the conclusion was it's better than keeping the status quo, so that many of the disciplines try to encourage public servants to take the lead from below, so that they're asking public servants to actively discover, define, and produce public value. And the way they do it is that they integrate politics, substance, and administration. So it's very important to first understand the context of the operations in a public organization. Leadership role in a public sector means identifying obligations, setting priorities, and utilizing management tools to produce value addition. In such a context, strategic approach becomes daily practice of any public servant, and formulating feasible strategy will greatly enhance your chance of success. Managers are responsible for adding value, strategy, and overall direction, selecting and directing that particular strategy, and leaving the organization and its mission better than before, and even nurturing future leaders who can take over when you leave the organization. So it overall has 3 dimensions of given mandate and mission: authorizing environment, which is identical to political environment surrounding your organization, and operational capacity, meaning that the internal capacity that you are managing to produce output. So let's first discuss the nature of these 3 dimensions. The missions and mandates typically are vague, abstract, sometimes contradicting, typically a list of things with no clear instruction on how to achieve them. As a public servant, you have the choice of prioritizing among the given mandates. Doesn't mean that you are able to totally ignore the mission and mandates that are given to you, but then you can selectively prioritize, focus on certain areas to develop your strategy to produce output and outcomes. So you are with certain degree of maneuverability. The second dimension is the external environment, which is authorizing environment. Uh, it, it has a list of stakeholders that are surrounding your organizations. They could be official stakeholders, they could be unofficial stakeholders, but then the list of the stakeholders refers to those who oversee your organizations or to those who can give directions to your organization, such as the decision makers or the legislative people, the official people. Also, you would have to deal with central government's budget authority, and that would also be included as official authorizing environment official actor. However, there are also a list of unofficial actors such as that doesn't have direct authority over your agencies and yet still can actually influence and what you do, such as media, the NGOs, or the interest groups. They're all becoming active in policy decision-making process at a national level. And they can actually indirectly influence you and your organization and what you do. The third category is the internal capacity, your own organization. Regardless of your position in your organization, you could be at the top, you could be on middle, or you could be a new staff in your organization. And still, there are stakeholders, internal stakeholders that you have to find your way through to do your job and perform your job. So typically for the mid-level manager, they have to manage their own staff, at the same time also manage their bosses, and also they have to play the role of connecting to other divisions and department, and also has to play the role of persuading others to follow their directives. So unless you have a direct control over other people, you always have to rely on ways to influence them rather than controlling them. So another way of looking at this picture almost looks like a compass, the compass that gives you a direction. It has, contrary to the triangle that we've seen before, it divides the mission and objectives. The reason here is that mission is sort of an overall sense of direction. Objectives could be short-term objectives and long-term objectives. Typically, the short-term objectives are within a year. Long-term objective is within 2 or 3 years. So it ties with your tenure at your position. And also it has the capacity, internal capacity issues, and authorizing environment issue. So unless you have a good sense of balance among these competing objectives and multiple dimensions of these managerial issues, your chance of success decreases dramatically. Simply put, you have to allocate your time, your limited time and attention to balance all these aspects. So even to think about developing a strategy, these are the checkpoints which in turn will allot you for many necessary elements for developing effective strategy. Also important for you to recognize is your scope of own authority and influence. You have to understand what is under your direct control, or you can only hope to influence. Those elements that you can not control directly typically would take more time, need advanced planning, and also the result is less certain. Adding value, the zone where public value is achieving through careful balance of these compass headings, is the task as a public servant that you are mandated with. For strategy to become a reality, it requires a plan for achieving the value added by altering capacity or other variables you can actually affect. Those you cannot control or is actually beyond your control, so it's far better that you take them as a given constraint. In developing strategic action plan, you have to consider available tools, analyze in the authorizing environment, key constraints, short-term and long-term horizon and needs, and priorities and orders. So developing your strategy according to the what you can directly control, also paying balanced attention on all these elements becomes very important. These are the list of the practical tips for good strategy. Rather than reading the slide, I would leave it to you so that when we share the PPT, you can actually go line by line and just read it carefully. Just one thing, however, that I need to highlight your attention is the flexible application. Developing a good strategy doesn't mean that you keep the strategy as is as long as possible. Environment, context change all the time, especially when there's a change in the stakeholders, very important authorizers. The whole strategy may have to be changed accordingly. So the attitude that you have to take when you're developing this type of good strategy is aim, fire, and ready. You develop a strategy, you implement it, and see how it goes, and then be ready to be flexible as you implement the strategy. And this principle attitude is very important in implementing a strategy into a reality. As an individual, when you're leading the organization, you have to play a leadership role. And for you to identify what type of leadership role that would suit the situation could become quite important. Of course, as I explained, situation constantly changes, and your organization also could grow or shrink depending upon the situation. So that this would imply you need to be able to adopt and rely on at least 2 or 3 different types of leadership style as needed. Now, this table that you see on the screen is a copy table from Daniel Goleman. The article is titled Leadership That Gets Results from the Harvard Business Review, published in 2000. And he focuses on the relationship between the leadership style and organizational climate, which in turn will affect the overall performance of the organization. And he defines 6 leadership styles and 6 dimensions of the organizational culture. So that 6 different leadership styles: coercive, authoritative, affiliative, democratic, pace setting, and coaching. That in a current culture and current organizational theory, that you may believe that you have to follow one style, which is more of a coaching style or the democratic style. But then in terms of producing output and result, the author's argument is that he did some of a little bit of research and produced this table with the 6 different leadership styles: coercive, authoritative, affiliative, and also the 6 elements of organizational climate: flexibility, feel how free to innovate; responsibility, sense of obligation to the organization; standards, expectation of the people at the job; rewards, sense of accuracy of performance feedback; clarity about mission and values; commitment to a common purpose. That each of these different leadership styles may influence these 6 dimensions in different ways. For instance, if one employs coercive leadership style, forcing people to follow, that it has all the negative effects, but then strange enough that it has not so much negative effect on enforcing the standards, expectation of people at the job. So overall, with each of these different type of leadership style, the overall impact on the organizational climate, the most profound impact comes from having an authoritative leadership style, followed by affiliative type of leadership style, democratic leadership style, and the coaching type of leadership style. So in terms of producing output, the exercising authoritative type of leadership style could become quite effective to certain situations. And yet, the author further argues, even those leadership styles of coercive and pace setting that are producing negative impact on organizational climate, but then depending upon the situation to produce outcome, that you may be forced to play the role of coercive or the pace-setting type of the leadership. That depending upon the leadership style, it influences the organizational climate, and it can even affect 1/3 of the productivity of your overall organization. So also, what you have to consider in this argument is your personality and your personal style. Some of the style may fit you, some other styles may not fit you. But then the lesson from here, the argument from here is don't rely on a single leadership style. You have to be able to accommodate and apply at least 2 or 3 different leadership style that fits your personality. Now, it is often thought that your authority comes with your position, meaning when you become director, deputy mayor, or even the president of the nation, your authority is automatically given and you're free to exercise them willingly. However, nothing can be far from the truth. It is true that your official authority is defined and constrained by your position in the organization, and yet one can achieve much higher level of authority and also can have very little authority depending upon what you do and how you exercise them. Actually, it is tips for how to increase your own personal power and influence. So if you're a mid-level manager, or even if you're a new staff, that you can develop your authority and influence by finding ways to earn these authority and influence. Also, there are things that are not explicit in the mission, mandate, governing laws, charters, and yet certain expectation of the leadership role on you. So which could be from traditions or sheer expectation from the public or the others. And you have to be able to answer those. So important lesson when you try to enhance your authority and influence by following these tips, that you have to constantly check your boundaries and also seek to expand your authority and influence to do your job efficiently and effectively. Don't assume that the authority and influence is automatically given to you. You have to really play the role and work hard to earn the authority and influence, no matter where you are in your relative positions in the organization. Also, when you play the leadership role, you have to find, again, what would be the proper leadership role that fits the situation at hand. So these are the practical tips for finding your role that would fit the situation. So have to have a good understanding of your operational context, your degree of authority and influence, expectations upon you. You need to think strategically about the role you need to play to deliver the result and ways to expand your influence while doing your work. Also, you need to respect the role others have to play within organizational setting and by governing law. For instance, if the certain stakeholders by governing law or by constitution exercising the oversight of your organization, you have to expect their role. It's role they have to play, and you are playing along with their role, and you're also playing your part in that setting. It may sound strange, but it's almost like a playing in a play. And too often, that we encounter public officials that are not really respecting the role of the politicians that they play in the governance. But then they are playing their role according to what is defined for them to play. And as a public servant, you have obligation to answer to their questions, because they are the decision makers representing the people, right? So this, unless you have any questions, will lead to the next topic, which is, so who are the stakeholders, typical stakeholders? and how do we analyze the dynamics of the stakeholders? Because some of the stakeholders will be supporting your effort. Some of them may come in play and hinder your effort and put constraints on you. So these are the sort of a list of stakeholders, the usual suspect. Of course, they are not complete in this list, but then shown as an example. Also, this list of stakeholders would change as your managerial situation changes. For instance, in times of budget processing, in times of policy design, in times of policy implementation, the list of the stakeholders will change. And as situation changes, the relative importance of these stakeholders also change. This implies that you need to prioritize among them. Because you have limited time and attention, you need to allocate your time wisely. You're not 100% putting your effort managing relationship with stakeholders, because you also have to pay attention on managing the organization, also revisiting the strategies, doing other things. So about 1/3 of the time, you can only apply in managing stakeholders. So when you do that, then with this full list of the stakeholders, you need to prioritize. For instance, at a time of the budget processing, you may need to pay more attention on the oversight authorities or the budgetary authorities. In terms of implementation, you may have to work closely with the media, constituents, also your staff, technical expertise. So these list changes constantly. Now, once you have identified and prioritized stakeholders, try drawing out on a board or on a piece of paper, any paper can do, that place them in a circle and place them on a paper and try to draw the line with your organization in the center and try to identify whether they are helping your organization or hindering your organization, right? And the reason why we need to do this exercise is, as a manager, when I approach them to manage the relationship, I need to find out how to approach them and what their concerns would be. So that means you have to actively engage yourself, putting yourself in their shoes and try to understand what their role or the concerns of each of these stakeholders. So this is to think through how you can influence them, right? You can, by doing so, you can anticipate their moves or the counter moves or the actions they may take to help you or hinder your efforts. In that respect, communication becomes a key factor. And it's on top of the usual maintenance of the good working relationship with them. For instance, when you're trying to persuade them, if you try to use an argument that was very persuasive to a budgetary or personnel, when you talk to politicians, that argument may not fly. So depending upon the concerns of the stakeholders and the type of personality of the stakeholders, you may have to develop a different set of arguments and different approach when you try to persuade them. Now, in some cases, those stakeholders who are openly opposing to your effort, it's very difficult to win them over and make them supporting your effort. Now, with the time constraints, sometimes it's almost not practical to go after them and turn them to support your effort. If that's the case, the most thing that you can do is neutralizing them, meaning that they would not take any action or not express their opinion. Of course, they oppose, but then if they are not taking any action or not openly opposing your opinion, that much that you are becoming successful in managing that relationship. The additional tip here, this job of public manager is very difficult, especially compared to the private managers when the mandate that are given to them is producing profits. However, the public managers are given multiple mandates and multiple obligations. that you have to be able to allocate your time and effort to manage all these relationships and also try to meet all these multiple obligations at the same time, which is very difficult. I used to teach this course in KDI School of Public Policy, and to supplement what we mean by managing multiple obligations and managing multiple relationships, I use real-time cases, discussion cases, about 15, 20 of them over a course of a semester. Then at this point, I'm told to do this in 45 minutes, so I shouldn't be expecting you to fully comprehend this. But if you are coming from the public sector, and if you are having more than 7, 8 years of working experience, you can easily understand what I mean by this, that managing multiple obligations and managing multiple relationships. Because of high demand placed upon you, on top of this, also have to managing your organization. Some people may see it as, oh, it's almost impossible to do anything about it. I'll just do what I can do, and depending upon the situation, I'll just manage the key relationship, focus on them, and try to do things. But that surely will reduce your chance of success in the future. Another complication that comes is the expectations, perceptions, that public organizations are often placed with the public expectations. For instance, your organizations are in charge of managing a small area of health-related issues, but then you're not given the authority to oversee the private practitioners, the hospitals. But then people may see something going wrong in the private hospital and may expect your organizations to control them, where you have no formal authority of controlling the private hospitals or the way they manage it. So if that happens, then you are caught in between public expectations and your constrained authority, that tied hands. So to avoid such an issue, you also have to constantly check what type of expectation is placed upon your organization, that what people expect your agency or your division or your department to perform, regardless of the availability of the resources, the authority, that expectation that you have to be able to address. It's very not good deal still as a manager that you have to find a way to address those concerns. The difficult part, the most difficult part comes from handling the relationship with the media. Now, this requires another class or sort of a webinar to really go and see the ins and outs of managing the relationship with the media. But then one thing that I need to highlight is that as a public manager, if you practice certain tools wisely, you can actually use the media as part of your managerial tool. That the media is for you to reach out to the public, and you can play some tricks with well, that's a bad word. You can actually use the media to reach out to the public and deliver your message to the public. And sometimes it's very needed tactics, and also has to think about, you will have to think about whether there's a way of using the media to your advantage. And another thing is, we always say that managing the relationship with the reporter is important, but then it's half the time you want to keep them close, but then also half the time you want to keep them remote from you, because being a reporter, they will report anything that you say. So even if you say it's off the record, you discuss things with the reporter and you expect the reporter to print it in the article. So it's not like you're believing the reporter to be your close friend and believing that he'll only say the good things. You always have to keep your right distance from the reporter, and also keep the relationship ongoing, which is very important, so that you and your organization don't become the victim of the press coverage. Now, the third dimension of your internal tools. This is the whole point here is this. You may be very skilled at managing external relationships. You have a very good understanding of the mission and mandates that are given to you. You develop the strategy, but then if you fail to produce outcome and output that are appealing to external stakeholders or also in line with the mission and mandate, then over time, your credibility gets eroded. So for you to be able to exercise more influence and control over stakeholders and also over your staff, you have to be able to deliver result. This is very needed to reinforce your credibility. So you always seek to align incentive with mission, objectives, and culture. You use the meeting structure to reflect strategy. You prioritize things, and you also reach out for the needed expertise. And you also constantly revisit the mission and mandate that are given to you to define the decision criteria and priorities. And you also reach out to the top, reach out to the bottom. It's a balance issue that you also need to walk around. That if you are just reading reports from the papers, reading feedback from the computer monitors, it doesn't work. Find ways to reach out. You go talk to them and get their feedback. Constantly get their informations, and you reflect those into your strategy and next action items, right? And one trick that you may pay more attention to is this: what measures gets done. What you measure is what you get. So in terms of applying evaluation, you have to understand the limit of applying these evaluation criteria. At the same time, you can use these evaluation criteria to your advantage, that you can actually influence the behavior of your staff on how you evaluate your staff. Now, another tool that I provided with reading material is called More Tools. If you see the blue heads, the first character in all these 9 dimensions, it reads More Tools for you to remember this easily. Now, this is a step-by-step structure one can exercise, follow through when you're developing your own personal strategy, what needs to be done. So that the first thing, the mission and purpose, that you are actually revisiting the mandates that are given to your organization and also to you, and think of what direction that you need, your organization needs to move into. The objective of the manager, objective as the manager of you, in this dimension that you're thinking, what are the long-term goal of the long-term objectives that you need to achieve? What are the short-term objectives that you need to achieve? First, think about the long-term objectives, and then think about what needs to be done now to achieve the long-term objectives, and then add short-term objective items, right? It's very important that you actually distinguish the two. Again, the short term would imply 1 year span, long term, 2 or 3 years, because it has to be tied with your job tenure, right? And then you think about the risks and problems. With the current situation, what you're doing here is that you're thinking about what would happen if I do not take any action, right? So if I maintain the status quo, not do anything, what would happen to me or to our organization in 1 or 2 years, right? And if any of the things that you anticipate to worsen the situation, then you would consider them as risk that you need to control, right? Also the problems that may arise that you need to pay attention to. This exercise is needed to set priorities also, because certain risks and certain problems you can directly control, easily control. Some others that you have to put long-term careful planning to address them properly. So this is another tip that would be given to you. And the external and internal actors, again, this is related to the analysis of the stakeholders. Stakeholders outside your organization, stakeholders within your organization, depending upon your position within your organization. If you're new staff, the stakeholders would be regardless of your position in your organization, whether it be a new staff, mid-level manager, or even the top-level manager, there are internal stakeholders and external stakeholders that you need to pay equal attention and maintain relationship for you to produce output and results. So the tool that you can apply here again is called mapping technology. Mapping tool that you are trying to draw on the board, identify the list of stakeholders, try to understand from their perspectives that what they can do to help or hinder, what are their interests, concerns, what are the resources they have to influence you, and try to anticipate and classify them accordingly to those who can help you and those who can hinder you, right? And also the next element, tools and constraints. You're thinking about managerial tools that you can employ. Again, this goes back to the idea of zone of control and zone of influence. There are tools you can readily apply and you can directly control. And at the same time, there are tools that you can only use to help to influence others, right? So these are the ones that you have to consider and applies these tools appropriately to the context that you're operating in. The constraints part is typically the resource constraints. It could be your financial resource. It could be the physical resources that you have at the moment. It could also mean the human resources of your organization. The public manager, as a public manager, there never is a time that public manager have enough resources. Always on a constraint, but then constantly being hammered by others to produce more result with less resources. So you have to think about what could be doable, what could be feasible with my given constraints, and that also have to constantly seek to expand the resources. You can only do so by demonstrating you're able to deliver. And it also has to be reflected in your strategy. So for me to argue for more budget next year, what are the things that I need to demonstrate now so that I can convince others to give me more resources, right? So if you give me a certain amount of dollar, I'll be able to produce this much output. Very cell-level argument to the budget people, right? Politicians, you probably have to develop another argument, but then still, depending upon the stakeholders and the authorizers, you have to think what I need to do now so that I can use that as an evidence to help me in the future, right? The next element, opportunities. This is actually asking the question, okay, I'm too caught up paying attention on handling the risks, handling the problems, the current situations, but then could there be any hidden opportunity for me so that if I come out a winner of this situation, that I could actually do something more, for instance, getting more resources, or winning a new support of the stakeholders, or winning the support of the public, or enhance your credibility, expand your influence. Those are the hidden opportunities. So the reason that we put the hidden opportunities there is that when you're drafting your strategy, you actually have to think carefully on these hidden opportunities, because unless otherwise, you may miss these hidden opportunities and not fully utilize and develop your personal assets, right? The next element is the outcomes and elements of stable solution. Now, this part is actually thinking about where you want to be, not thinking about everything else, Just concentrate on where you want to be out of this situation. There will be a situation that you can describe as a desirable state of the situation, right? And the point of this exercise is that if you know where you want to go, then you can think about how you can get there, right? This is could be a quite strange analogy, but then in sports, that there's an image training that for the athletics, they image the outcome of their activities and try to get there. And the similar type of logic is applying here. As a public manager, for you and your organization, you're trying to picture where you want to be and then think about how to get there. The next element, the legacy part, is a little tricky part because it's very vague. What do we mean by legacy? It's actually meaning the long-term effect you can actually leave behind. So if someone else assumes your position, that your reputation will be there in the organization. Sort of a legacy of people and capacity that will continue to add value. The legacy of better services to the relevant community. A legacy that can more easily respond to the next manager, yet keep the progress you made, and leave the place and its client better than you find it. So it's something that you're leaving behind so that it becomes stable, so that your reputation also would go up afterwards. Now, this part, it's very hard to really force this to happen. It could happen, it could not happen, but then still, it will help you think about what my action would contribute to the long-term stability or the long-term element that makes the organization better than before. So it's kind of like forces you to think about, how do I prioritize things? So I would not do things that would make me escape the current situation, but then would make the situation worse later on, right? And the ninth element is the actually refers to the steps. You actually sit down with all these 1 to 8 elements analysis that you have done. You're actually trying to think about what actions needs to be taken. So with the situation, these are the actions that I can take. And again, going back to the earlier point, these exercises constantly requires revisiting of the strategy because constantly the situation changes. But then as you do this more often, that it almost becomes part of your nature. I'm sure that some of you already do this, either intentionally or sort of subconsciously. But then these are the tools that kind of forces you to structurally, systematically think through when you're developing your strategic action plan. The analytical reminders, when you're developing your strategies, get a full and detailed picture before deciding. Hold your conclusion and guesses until after analysis and considerations are complete. Also be flexible and integrate information, and also be disciplined in words and ideas to achieve the needed precision for the strategy in action. And always test your ideas, right? It always helps to talk to your peers, your bosses, your subordinate, whoever you need to talk to. They will always bring some new dimension, new perspective, new ideas into your strategy. So always test your ideas and your action plans, so it makes it always better. The practical tips for prioritizing your action, again, I'm not going to read this, just leave it for your reference so that you can take a look at them and ask me questions, I guess. I hope I kind of laid out the overall picture of what we mean by strategic leadership. Again, going back to the 3 dimensions: mission and mandate that are given to you, managing stakeholders, the authorizing environment, managing your organization, internal capacity, that balancing the three is the job of the public manager. That you have to pay equal attention on all three elements and craft your strategy accordingly, allocate your time and resources accordingly, so that you come up with a strategy that are realistic, that increases your chances of success, and also that adds value to the public. And by doing so, you will build your personal reputation, your influence, your authority over time. You can give us feedback through the online survey. We'll be mailing out emails shortly. And also, if you need to discuss what has been presented today, you can come to the Community Leaders webpage on the Asia Leadership homepage, or you can send us the email directly. And also, within a week or so, a video recording and brief technical summaries of this particular webinar will be posted in K-Learn and in the Community of Leaders webpage for your review. Right? And I also need to highlight the e-courses that we will be sending announcements, invitations via email and through the Yammer group this afternoon. We are, yes. And for the participants of the 2017 annual program in Tokyo, you are required to complete the course on becoming change agent, as well as select another e-course from the list that we are going to share. This one, right? Of these 5 e-courses. You can find these e-courses in the Asia Leadership webpage and also the K-Learn, right? Dev Asia, also, okay. So please stay engaged with us. Frequently visit these sites, right? We'll be constantly updating the websites until the actual event and even after the actual event. The event is happening on 27-30 June this year, again at the Tokyo. And we are expecting about 30 participants from all over the Asian region. So hope to see you there. Great. Thank you very much for listening in, and I'll see you at the next webinar.